morning. My name's Velvet Eldred, and this is the second episode in a podcast series called Building a Bridge to Belonging. It's also very important to me to acknowledge the Indigenous elders, past, present and future, who have been the custodians of the land, the air and the sea, and who I have a deep and infinite respect and awareness of the beauty of their Dreamtime stories that have held this country safe.
We're very lucky, aren't we?
We are very lucky and more privileged than most, I believe, because in Cairns there is a deep connection to the Indigenous people who have been very active in holding this land together. Yeah. And the ultimate reason I'm really invested in building a bridge to belonging is I have a firm belief that there is a necessity to belong to yourself so you can belong to community and then belong to the world. And if you belong to yourself, then you'll always sit in your true north. And no matter what's happening out there in the external world, you will know yourself enough to know what you have to do, and you'll do it with your whole heart and soul. So the reason these podcasts are coming at you is because I've been a community cultural development worker all my life. And in a way, I've kind of played it safe because I have a public profile, I need to get grants and quick grants and be seen as probably totally trustworthy. So there's a part of my life I've never spoken about, and it's my spiritual life. It's the dreams I have, the voices I hear that direct my life, because when I don't listen to them deeply, I really trip up and hurt my soul. So the stories that I share with you today have been witnessed by the group of women I have the honour and the privilege to call my friends, but also the women who witness my life and, kind of witness how I live my life and know that it's authentic to me. I'm not in the business of telling anybody how to live their life, but what I do like to do is stand beside people and hold space for them to struggle why they become who they are. So before I go any further, I'd like to introduce my beautiful friend Melissa.
Hello. Thanks for inviting me today. I feel very honoured to be part of this series and also to get to chat to you before you go. So for those that are unaware, within days, Velvet will be going on a plane and she's going on an incredible trip, adventurous for some, but for Velvet it feels like you're kind of going home and it's going to be very tricky for you to make the decision when you've had enough of that adventure and can come back here. So I figured that will be quite a personal journey for you. So we're very fortunate to have Velvet as part of our podcast crew here at the studio, and we're going to follow you along your journey. So we're going to check in as you hit a new continent, maybe a new horizon, maybe new friends. We're looking forward to it. Yeah, that's guaranteed. Let's go back a bit to Velvet and how you evolved into where you are.
Yeah. So I think there are two recurring dreams that I've had. And I do mean when I start to evolve and wriggle out of my skin and go, who I was no longer suits me in the world, this dream comes up and I'm on walkabout with some Indigenous women. They wear red skirts, we're in the desert, and there is an older Indigenous man with us and he's like camp cook. And we come to this lake and there's a waterfall and I swim out, the waterfall stops and a set of stairs appear. And I walk up the stairs and as I turn around to look over the vista and just marvel at the beauty, a door in the rock wall opens up and 3 serpent women step out. And I know I'm scared because I can feel my heart pounding and my arms sweating. And this is one of the as a dreamer, I am a lucid dreamer. So I'm aware I'm in my bed and I'm aware I'm often sometimes in 2 other places at once. It's something that happens to me naturally. It's something that was trained in me because it terrified me. But of course I asked the world, can you help me? And the world helps me, sends the right person always. So these women say to me, the only bit I can remember is black blood wattle and then they bite me on the neck. And the water then starts to flow again. I'm swept off. And as I fall into the water, the old man starts to walk before me and he becomes young again. He becomes young. He drags me out of the water and I know I'm in like a coma of 3 days where my whole energetic framework, I change. I am not the person I was before. That dream has been with me since I was about 12 years old.
Wow, that must have been very scary at 12.
I think scary, but also there's a part of me who knows that world and knows how to navigate it. And it's that part of myself that I learnt to hide because I imagine once upon a time I would have been burnt as a witch. On Friday, the 19th of July, was the end of the Salem witch hunts.
Yeah, wow.
Hundreds of thousands of women were burnt for being dreamers, herbalists, midwives. I mean, this is history. And our voices are still shut down,
Yes, it's fact. So that's right.
Yeah, that's one dream. And then the other dream I have is it could almost be Buddhist in its flavour, but I'm sitting up there like a Rinpoche or an honoured teacher, but there's this pressure from this man to write it down, make a way. And the resistance I have in my body to tell anybody how they should live their life is real. Now, I can say, can I challenge you? Can I offer you some feedback? There's something I'd like to say to you. Would you like to hear it? But I am not going to tell anybody who and how to think. And when I sit on this planet right now with the authoritarian regime change that I'm seeing, like I'm talking about now, like even this Albanese's communication legislation amendment, where essentially they're asking that us, the people, to quiet our voices and live in our knees to a government mainstream narrative and to a social media narrative. I just have to go, I'm so bored. I am bored, Mel. We have done this all
over
before.
And over. We've seen it.
And
for those that are overseas, because this is likely to be international, Albanese is our current Prime Minister. So just to pick up on that, though, I think you could insert any name. Really, that's what your point is, isn't it?
And the point then was, having experienced the COVID years and I don't know how to explain it, the epigenetic fear that may have, if we have past lives and we haven't had a really good time on this planet for the last 2,000 years in terms of the people being free and governments and authority doing the will of the people, then there's a lot of fear that comes up. On one hand, you have this world that says we live in a democracy, you're allowed to think, you're allowed to speak, but you're not really.
Within certain limits, that's right.
Yeah. We know this, but not really. So COVID was fascinating for me because I believe in bodily autonomy, but I also had dreams. Yeah. And I had dreams that it wasn't right for me. But the intentional cruelty, the intentional cruelty that I saw offered to the community broke my heart. And how quickly people were othered and demonised. And I just, we still do it. We've not learned anything. And now we've got all these other things that are happening about in terms of personal sovereignty and freedom. And it just loops me back to I'm bored.
Yeah.
And then I had...
You're bored because you've been here before.
We've all been here before.
Before you go too much further, can you unpack to me what you mean by the
epigenetic?
Epigenetic.
So science will now tell you and tell us, and you can Google this, that, the people that say that we have past lives or that spiritual dimension of that life we've lived over and over again, we can actually track this scientifically now in our epigenetic history. Our bodies remember. I remember. I have remembered who I've been in past lives since I was little. I used to say to my mum, and this is not something I reveal, this is the revealing podcast of Velvet. I used to say to my mum, where did you hide my wings? I meant dragon wings. I have a deep reverence and connection to the dragon lore, and not just the myth and the serpent energy on this planet. And when I start tracking it, of course, the serpent energy has always represented the divine feminine. And then as a kid, this rainbow serpent would come and just look at me, and I could be terrified of snakes, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't have an innate fear of snakes. And, I've had dreams where these snakes or dragons have eaten me, And part of me goes, well, I have to die into myself to become myself. That was the story of Jesus.
Yeah.
You know, to thy own self be true, sat over the oracle of Delphi. The Christ says time and time again, the kingdom of heaven lies inside. And yet I live on a planet that externalizes everything I am through advertising, propaganda, offering me products that says I should be big, better, more beautiful. And I go, well, I don't have a tidy gene. Like, I really tried to look tidy this morning. And sorry, people, I can't do it. I don't have that gene. No. And maybe it's because there's so much going on in my brain that I'm capturing, you know. I try to explain to people sometimes it's like I have 9 televisions going on in my brain.
Oh, so you think the hair is static electricity
or I just don't have enough time because I couldn't
your
be
internal
bothered.
devices.
Because, you know, my eyes are always going, I'm trying to capture the pieces that and I'm going to use the word God, Goddess, Spirit, Buddha. I don't know how you lay claim to the truth that the world is good, the world is whole, and what I'm looking for is wanting me too. Yeah. And that if I'm brave enough to just chuck it out there, the world goes, hey, stand down, go to Mongolia. And I went, well, why not? Then what happens? I meet this incredible woman through Facebook called Saraa Munkhbayar. She has a Facebook page. She has a community school in the north of Mongolia. I've been invited to work some days for board and food in her community school. And that's the world I live in. The world is good, the world is kind, it provides, but I have to be brave. And by brave, I mean putting down you should, you could, you must, this is what your life should look like, and play small.
Yeah. Well, I think that for a start, going back on a couple of things you've said, first of all, you are just in every day. If you didn't know this behind the scenes of Velvet, you would still get a sense of her fearlessness. There's no doubt. If I was standing in a main street and there was a mob coming towards me, the person I'd have beside me is Velvet. There's no question. And that goes at more personal scenarios too. So, and you've revealed that through your professional life and some of the jobs you've had in the past, which we don't have to go over. But this fearlessness, you talk about dragon law, which again, some people who have never experienced this ability to see mythology in real life. Yeah, behind the veil. But that fearlessness comes through in your everyday, no matter what's going on for you behind the scenes. So you were saying the dreams didn't scare you when you were young. The world generally doesn't scare you other than the stupidity of the hypocrisy, as you call it.
Hypocrisy scares me.
Yeah. I mean, that's just because it's a trick, right? And we can be tricked.
Yeah, and I watch people suffer.
Yeah. Yes.
Because of the trickery, Mel.
Yep.
The enslavement and the brutal regime of, you know, I've just come off the back of working with veterans, returned soldiers. If there was a place that broke my heart, like my heart gets broken because that's what heart's meant to do, break and feel. The way returned soldiers get treated, and my beautiful friend Mitch, just watching his story and knowing all they've got for these men is, oh, you're broken, you're not a unit of productivity anymore, and here, take these pharmaceuticals and shut the fuck up.
Yep.
That's what they've got for them.
Yep. That's it.
It's horrifying.
Not much more than that.
No community, no real help. And, you know, that the hypocrisy of ticking boxes, and yes, the RSL's there, but is there any real integration back into the community on Anzac Day, we might remember? Then what happens the other 355 days of the year?
Yeah. So that's where I think, for those that are listening out there, someone like Velvet is someone who really puts themselves into the firing line. You don't mean to. I think you just find yourself there. You'd much rather be at home making cups of tea and in your garden. Growing beautiful roses, by the way. She grows beautiful roses. Yeah, so, but somehow life keeps pulling you back in, even though you try to
run away.
Oh, you do. And now you're about to head to Mongolia, which wasn't a surprise because I've known your interest in that particular region, but you've also been close to that region before. But Mongolia itself, where did that come in?
Look, people who know me giggle because I would tell them that I am in my masculine Genghis Khan as an archetype with a little bit of Yoda. And in my feminine, I'm like a Buddha seer with a little bit of Mary Poppins. But
Mary Poppins, I've
Mary
been thinking of
Poppins. I
her.
know, Mary
I
Poppins.
feel like that should be my business card, Mary Poppins. Yeah.
But my first horse was called Khan after Genghis Khan. So if
Really?
you talk about epigenetic memory, I have a memory of Mongolia. I was talking to Saraa in Mongolia, and she sort of said to me, "Are you sure you aren't Mongolian?" It's just a ferocity that comes through that I think is of that lineage. It's like I remember, I can taste it, I feel it. I feel like I'm going to step off the land in Mongolia and feel like, oh my God, there's part of me, I'm home. But the other thing that happened to me was I was stressing out about this world, and that grandmother voice that speaks to me said, stand down. You've done enough, because what I need to do now is go and craft myself on the anvil of the world and be tempered. Because sometimes the technology that's within my body, what I know, how I know, can only be remembered by being put in tight spaces. You know, I think the body has the capacity to heal itself, to regenerate. I mean, I woke up one morning with my grandmother standing over my bed, and she told me I had breast cancer, and I did.
This is not your mother, your grandmother in this.
No, well, she was my grandmother, but
She
she's
had passed, right.
She's passed, and I realised that breast cancer in and of itself was a signifier that there were other things, other emotional and long-held belief systems that needed to be shed. Because dis-ease is an uneasiness in the body, and the body tries to wake us up by offering us an illness that needed to be looked at. And as I worked with this extraordinary naturopath, because, you know, the medical centre just wanted me to do what I was told, which is probably a bit of a, I'm not, seriously, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So
we might not unpack all that because that's a whole episode
but just go and get a
itself,
diagnosis. And then I went to a naturopath
Yes,
and an acupuncturist and a few other people, and I went, okay, I've manifested this because, and that's where I worked. And of course, the breast cancer then was an easy journey.
Yeah.
Easy peasy, So I really believe in my body as a sacred temple, and again, you know, walking beside other women, my beautiful friend Lamo, and you know, a lot of these links I will put in this podcast because these are women I think you really need to know, because as you said, an hour, you know, half an hour, I can't unpack all of this.
No.
But with Lamo, I've walked Mary Magdalena's path.
Yes.
And the 7 original shadows, that the Bible became a book of control when the council at Nicaea decided that it'd just take on the corporation of Rome's structure and, you know, live off the fat of the land and the fear of the people. I already knew that as a kid. I mean, I went to Catholic school. I already knew it was bullshit.
Yeah.
So this is what I mean about me. I'm in this world and I already know it's absolute crap. So Lamo's work, she has Ministry of She, and I work with Lamo. So in the background, I'm talking with Lamo about, you know, the whole crafting of the human being, and I'm heading towards 60 now. So there's another part of me that needs to be crafted, which was the call by spirit to go to Mongolia and then into Ireland.
And then into Ireland, which is your heritage, so that makes sense. There's no question. When's the last time you were in Ireland?
Well, I never got there because I went to London when I was 21, and my mum had said to me, she knew me very well, that there was a real fear in my mum that if I went to Ireland, I'd end up part of the IRA. Because I did have a temper, and I was quite ferocious. Another beautiful friend of mine at university told me that everybody was terrified of me. Now, that came as a big shock.
Really?
But again, I had no capacity to deal with stupid and to deal with hypocrisy. You know, you can't tell me university is a place of free thought and, you know, evidenced by research, and then tell me I can't write that, which is what I saw with COVID, you know, that whole pillaring of people who did their own research. Like, when was science not about the research?
Absolutely. So Ireland itself is... Well, that's huge. I don't know why I always presumed you'd been there. I suppose because you talk about it so clearly as if it's a very significant part of your cultural identity as well, that connection to the Irish condition.
It is, because all my family was Sinn Féin. They
Yep.
were supporters. You know, I was very aware of what happened to Bobby Sands in 75 and Thatcher. And, you know, I know people are told not to talk about politics and religion, but how can you not when they have such massive influence on our lives?
So I think you'll find, and when we're going to talk to you along your journey, and so I'm really excited when you get to Mongolia, those very first moments as you step off the plane. So I'm going to ask you to write them in the moment, because you forget it, like it drifts off and all of a sudden you're into the adventure, but that, does it feel home, all of that. But then Ireland, when you finally get there, which is a full circle in terms of your own genealogy and how the migration came here, but then you, as a child of those migrants, cut forward a couple of generations, still have this very strong connection to this homeland.
Well, it's because people were kicked out.
Yeah.
You know, like, you can still look at the Irish famine, and Wikipedia will tell you that there was a failed potato crop. And it's like, seriously, no. The food was deliberately taken out of Ireland. They were pushed across the country to the poorest part, and they were expected to die out. Does that story not ring any bells? Does that story? And so what happened was people fled, and my family fled. 1854, Thomas Kennelly left Ireland. And like all refugees, there's a hope of going home. Yeah. There is something about Ireland in my body that still says home. Yeah. And look, there it is.
Yes.
Like, there are that's how I know. How do I know I'm speaking true for me? There are the tears. Yeah. There they are. Yeah. And then being called forward by two beautiful women, Genevieve McGee. She, again, Magdalena, shadow work, women's work, extraordinary woman, and Jennifer O'Connelly, who's Druid. But they work with rainbow serpent energy. Yeah, right. And here it is again, this serpent energy that wants back on the planet. And for me, again, it's the divine feminine. And not in... It's the women connected to intuition, connected to spirit, connected to land. It's the sensual and sexual arts, the healing, the lack of living in shame and guilt. For me, this is all part of this serpent dragon energy rising. Yeah.
I'm fascinated in how it will play out in this, because there's a tendency for people when they have a belief in a whole philosophy or a folk legend of another country, you know, like you're going between Mongolia and Ireland, coming out of Australia where you were born. So there's this whole intercultural conversation going on with your
and that winds back to epigenetic memory.
That's it, yeah.
So why? Because this is what comes up through my body. You know, I have read so many books on Genghis Khan and the Kublai Khan. I mean, the Kublai Khan was possibly the first community development worker. Yeah, I mean, ruthless.
Yeah, wow.
Absolutely ruthless. But then once the people were conquered, then their own culture was allowed to flourish, and as long as they paid taxes and tributes, they were fine. Fascinating historical characters.
Yeah, and we do lose this, kind of what I was about to head to. You're coming from an Australian-born perspective, but with these very strong ties. You're about to go and put yourself right in the middle of these philosophies and laws and cultural contexts. And so that's really exciting for me to be able to watch and observe. So thank you. I feel really like having a little bit of privy inside Velvet, watching you on a day-to-day level, because you rarely sleep like other humans, right?
No, I don't.
I don't know how you do it. And
well, I had to give up the belief that sleep was necessary. So why I suffered with everybody telling me that it was necessary to get 6 to 8 hours sleep a night, then I suffered. But when I dropped that story and went, well, I've only ever slept 3 hours a night and I function. There are times I can go 7, 8 days without sleeping. Wow. And I function. But it's the shamanic part of me or the dreamer part of me. I often have a grief that I wasn't born into an Indigenous culture, because I would have been trained.
Yes.
in my culture, in this Western culture, I am othered. And particularly as a woman, with the intuition I have, I'm othered.
And even if your family hadn't migrated, you may have also been trained in Ireland, as you say, through...
Well, a Druid may have found me, and all my life I was trying to get into Indigenous people because I thought they would be the ones who would train me, and they were.
Yeah.
Again, luck, calling, fate, epigenetic history. I was sung into the Seven Sisters Dreaming by Munkhbayar and Mrs. Nellie Patterson, and I was only 26, 27, 28. I don't know. I've lived such a big life that I kind of have no memory of years or months. But I was sung in, and I was the youngest woman there, and I cried all day, and I was painted, and I felt like sitting with the grandmothers. I belonged. I finally had come home on this property, and then with that constant questioning, I was so lucky to have a friendship with Karen Rays, and of course she was my first podcast because it seemed important to me to start with our Indigenous people.
I was actually just going to suggest, if you're listening and you haven't heard that episode, go back to find Velvet with Karen chatting, because it's a very interesting thing. And certainly if you're not from Australia, or if you're not particularly educated, like you might be here in Australia but not understand this, while we don't honour properly our First Nation culture of this country, we as a whole community living on this continent are lacking having that background. And so if you do come from a country or a place like Mongolia, where its culture and tradition and the practice of that is every day, and well, there's times when it's been also ostracised, but even in Ireland, like you say, Druids and that kind of way of life is a lot more accessible. In Australia, we're piecing it together, aren't we?
Yeah. But I think too, I remember having a conversation with Lamo and going like, the women that came out of Ireland were probably very lucky because they hit a country where there wasn't an already indentured, structured religion. It came with us. But largely, if you moved out of a Sydney and say, you got to Australia, went through Sydney and then ended up at Ballarat, you were free. Yeah. The land started to mould us.
Yes.
The land here speaks so loud that I actually think Australians don't recognise how Indigenous they are because of the land.
Well, it becomes irrelevant. A lot of you're trying to put it into another, like you say, into rural, regional Australia, and you've come out of a potato farm in Ireland. Like it's not going to be relevant anymore. The same practice. So, I feel that. I actually wonder if people really consider how displaced they were.
Yes.
So they kind of talk about, my ancestors were on the first fleet, or they came over with that first group. So what happened before they got on that boat? They were ostracised and picked on and pulled out because they were trying to feed their family or whatever their reasoning. So, I think we as a nation forget to really unpack and go back to the full traditional roots of our
Absolutely. And I remember standing in a room and being typical me, I wasn't trying to be difficult, but I was very, very, very annoyed that the colour of my skin was more important than the fact that I was saying to them, but I have an Irish heritage. My family were booted because of what was happening in England, and that once upon a time in this country, there was no blacks, no dogs, no Irish. And then we were forgiven because of the colour of our skin, and we were colonised because of the colour of our skin. And, of course, people are going to want better for their elders and for their children. So you go, okay, I'm going to step into this privilege because it's easier. But never forget where we came from.
Yeah.
I don't forget. I don't know, and that's maybe because I grew up, as I said, in a family that kind of had that story with them, had the flavour of the Irish with them. And what was really funny is my mum married an Englishman. And there, of course, exactly. So, 3 times my dad went to ask for my mother's hand and Granddad said no.
No.
the final time Dad stepped up and said, I'm not coming to ask you for permission, I'm telling you that it's happening. They weren't allowed to get married into the church. They had to get married in the vestibule because Irish Catholics and English Protestants didn't get married. I mean, we're talking about the 60s here.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a child of this war where whole towns in Australia were either Protty, English, and you didn't get a job in either one's towns.
No.
You know, and then somehow there's this mesmerising forgetting that happens about where we come from. And it's like I often find people don't even care about history anymore.
Yeah. So I was in Belfast in the 90s and my partner was Protestant, and so when I did the Orange Man March and everything, so we have very different. Yeah, well, you know, I was just a backpacker having fun.
I was in love with the bloke.
I didn't know. He said, "Oh, we're going marching tomorrow." I'm like, "Oh, lovely," you know, marching bands. I had no idea what I was heading into, but it was interesting at that time what I learned about the world because it was changing. The Troubles had died away a little bit, though. A lot of the residual court cases were carrying on, and so my partner at the time was a witness to a situation, and so anyway, that's a whole nother story. But I remember us all sitting in this workman's club, and there was this fella there, and they went, "Oh, this is David." And we were all chatting and having beers and everything. And then when we were walking home after the beers, they started calling him Mick. And I found out later that that's how they got away with having a drink with their friends, is that in some places they had to just change their name.
Names, yeah.
That was it. It was simple. Yeah. So they still operated as humans. They still had birthday parties. They still had school friends and people they fell in love across the
divide.
And yet they just worked out, oh, we just call you Dave in the pub.
No one will know you're Irish Catholic because you're not called Milk.
No.
It's obviously a Protty name, David.
Yeah, and I saw that all the way through the world, actually, everywhere I travelled, that people still just get on with being human.
Yes.
Even though there's this hypocrisy of...
The macrocosm hypocrisy, yeah.
Well, that bit we do need another conversation about to unpack. I would love to thank you again for just, oh my gosh, sharing with me your life as you go. You know, this has been I don't know, it's got to be 15 years, hasn't it?
Yeah. If not a little bit longer.
Ooh, watch out. You're losing count. That's a
so I just keep leaning into I'm nearly 60, so I'm allowed to be as potty and as daft as I like now.
There's something about that. But I do want to remind you of a saying you refer to quite regularly, which is that dogma doesn't dance.
Yeah.
And yet we love a dance. You know,
that's what my first language is, dance. It's how I know myself.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So what does that metaphor mean for you in closing around as a saying that you carry with you?
So dogma is inflexible. It's how you have to be in the world because somebody's grinding their finger into your chest bone and telling you how you should be. And yet we have this whole, you know, you're free to be you, and it's such a big job to truly, authentically be yourself because you are rebelling at every moment. From the church, from the politics, from the corporations, from the big pharma, big everything. You know, why is organic food called organic food when it's just food and everything else is synthetic shit? What is that dogma around? And how supermarkets lay out their groceries so what they want you to buy is at eye level and everything else is hidden. Like everything is a psychops. Yeah. And to try and constantly pull yourself out of psychops is exhausting.
Yes.
So dogma is rigid, it's frozen, it's do as you're told, do as I do, not as I say, because inherently in any authority is you're witnessing what they do. Like I'm watching all these millionaires talk to us about climate change while they've just bought new yachts. And no one's saying, oh, I'm going to give up my private jet. Oh. But in The Guardian yesterday was this whole thing that flights in and out of Australia may be stopped soon just to fight climate change. But no one's talking about mining. Or this new green energy that says that the Sami people who live with nature have to give up their way so that we can go and mine cobalt and lithium because guess where they found it? Oh, in their land. Oh. you know?
Yeah.
This insane insanity that, and for me, it's just another wave of how they're going to get money out of us.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping for you because I know that's part of your grandmother's wish for you is to get some peace from all of this conversation that's just constant in our world. And, I've just going back on your saying there, you know, this idea that dogma is inflexible and how many ways that presents itself in our everyday. Like we can be part of an institution that we know, that's very dogma, you know, like the philosophy they teach and the rules. Church, for instance, is one of those dogmas that feels great as the camaraderie and the, you know, the people gathering and the shared meals, but actually behind it is this rigid rules and restrictions.
And it really leans into my 3 sins: comparison,
Yes.
collusion, competition.
Yeah.
Whenever you find yourself in that kind of energy, then you're not being authentic. You're actually living external and you're judging by somebody else's rules.
Yeah. So I have my saying, which is I'll join your revolution as long as I can dance.
Yep.
I don't know where that came from, but I'm up for any chance to dance or be flexible, which is the metaphor really, isn't it? But so, look, thank you. I know you're packed and I know you are a very organised person. So if you had a list to do, you've done it. And so I wish you well on your journey. I can't wait to hear your first impressions of Mongolia. I'd love to meet Saraa, Jennifer, Genevieve. I've met Lamo, so I really understand the calibre and the thinking that your posse do for us all on behalf of us, actually, really. You hold space and you really delve into what's going on in the world, and I really appreciate that. And I'm going to miss you. Thank God. Thank the universe for WhatsApp.
Oh, yes.
Oh, we're going to be able to keep in touch with that. That's fantastic.
And isn't that true, you know, because anybody who knows me knows I have no technical ability whatsoever. And I try, but I just blow up systems. I just have this incredible habit. But, you know, at least I can get a phone and video stuff and video Saraa in Mongolia and the kids. She's up in Maroon. Sarah's Guesthouse and Tours is her Facebook stuff.
Yes.
And she sent me a photo of her brother and a mum, and I just fell in love with the mum. I went, oh, my God, I'm going to get to meet these people in Mongolia.
I love the mothers. Well, fantastic. Well, you have a great trip.
Thank you.
Safe journey.
See you on the road.
Can't wait. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Jeremiah.